Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Terry Banis. I'm the Program and Communications Director at Michigan's Children, and I hope you all had a nice Memorial Day. And yay, we're unofficially in summertime in Michigan, so I am, as a summer girl, I am so excited about that. I'm also excited about today's Lunch and Learn program, which is coming to us within a few weeks of perhaps of the end of the state budget process, and there have been some major areas of dispute that are still need to be worked out in priority areas that we care about. We'll talk in this program, we'll talk about childcare, universal pre-K, and there's FY25 state budget talks, and we'll get into some detail about the problematic legislative initiative that would remove the requirement that ISDs contract with community-based organizations in the expansion of the state's free state preschool. Madeline Elliott is here, our early childhood, early learning policy guru, and so is Matt Gillard, famous CEO and podcast host, and they will provide a brief overview of where the budget process stands right now. Matt will expand on that and then introduce our panelists. But before we get to that, if we go to the next slide, Stephen, please. If you wouldn't mind, please, our guests and audience, please drop your name in the chat box so we know who's here today and where you're from. This program is being recorded. We will post the recording on our website, michiganschildren.org/lunch and learn. We'll post the recording there afterwards, probably by the end of the day, so that you can share it out or listen to it again if you're not able to stay on for the full hour. There'll also be some other additional resources posted there as well, including our budget basics. And also, if you're joining and you have a question, please post it in the chat, and we will. Some of the staff here is going to be monitoring the chat, and we'll be able to offer those up to Matt when it's time for questions. Next slide, please. Stephen, would you mind dropping down to slide 8, please? I'm going to take the last slide of the day first, just to offer you some announcements in the event that we get involved in a conversation and don't have time to get to this. But what I did want to point out is that we have created a couple of new budget basics analyses of the FY 2025 state budget, and those are available on our resource page under budget basics. That's at michiganschildren.org. So please check that out. We also redesigned that page to be a little easier to read, adding more color and visuals. And then also, please come back for the next Lunch and Learn program, which is going to be June 26th. It's going to be on the last Wednesday of every month, and the next one is June 26th. So mark that on your calendars. And then also, Matt has just recorded a new podcast with Superintendent John Searles, if I said that correctly, from Midland. He's with the education ESA in Midland, and he's an education leader that has written an op-ed in favor of including community-based organizations in a mixed delivery system of childcare in Michigan, and he lays out a very strong case for that. It was just published, and Matt was able to encourage him to come on the podcast, and we'll be posting that sometime today. So if you're not a member of our podcast family, please sign up for Speaking for Kids podcast, so that you can hear his comments and recording and any others to follow. And then lastly, we started a new feature this spring, Capitol Corner in a video version that runs every Friday on Facebook. You'll see Matt again talking about what happened in Lansing during the week and what's of note of interest to policy and advocacy issues involving children from cradle to career and families. And so lastly, we do have an e-bulletin where we post information of of interest to child and family advocates. If you haven't signed up for that, please go to our website and look under resources. Oh, no, Act Now page for that. So if we can come back to slide 3, Stephen, thank you for letting me make those announcements. And now I'm going to turn it over to Maddie and Matt for opening remarks on the status of childcare and pre-K and budget talks. It's coming near to the end, so this is an important time to be talking about this. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Terry. As Terry mentioned, I'm Maddie Elliott from Michigan's Children, and I focus on early childhood policy. I wanted to share really briefly kind of centering ourselves around this conversation today. So definitely in your mind, just for a moment, picture what would it look like if everyone in your community had the resources that they need to thrive? What would it look like if everyone had access to the affordable, high quality childcare and early education that their child needs and that they deserve? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, hold that thought in your mind, that, visioning around, why we're having this conversation. So right now we are in the, as Terry said, the last maybe month of the state budget process. The state budget goes into effect every year on October 1st. And so what happened this year was that the governor in February proposed her state budget. And then the state House and Senate have recently, in the past few weeks, proposed their own state budgets. And now what happens is that the House, the Senate, and the governor come together in a conference committee, several conference committees, in order to work out the differences between those budgets. And then they'll come together around passing one state budget in June. We're thinking it'll be mid-June. I heard from Matt that they're aiming for June 13th, but it could take longer. So that's, some framing around the urgency really of reaching out to lawmakers right now. And so I wanted to share that, we'll be talking about the Great Start Readiness Program, Michigan's free preschool program for low and middle income families. And the governor has proposed this year to remove the income cap on that. The governor also proposed including, continuing to include community-based providers in GSRP. She notably did not propose including home-based childcare providers in GSRP. So across, the legislature and the governor, they still continue to be left out of the expansion. So that's something that you could advocate for. But I wanted to share that the really concerning proposals we have are from the state House and the state Senate. The state House has proposed removing the incentive or the requirement that intermediate school districts contract with 30% community-based organizations for GSRP slots. Community-based organizations include childcare businesses, Head Start programs, YMCA childcare programs. And so, we are coming together during this hour to talk about how to fight back and how to push for a mixed delivery GSRP program or system to, prevent the House and Senate from altering the early childhood system in a way that will lead to the closure of childcare businesses if childcare businesses and Head Start programs and others are left out of the GSRP expansion. And so, yeah, that's essentially what we're going to be talking about, along with the state Senate has proposed that GSRP programs must provide wages that are the average GSRP wage within their region. They propose this, which sounds great, increasing GSRP wages for teachers. It sounds like a good thing to do, but it's an unfunded mandate, the way that the Senate proposed it. And so it would prevent a lot of childcare businesses and Head Start programs, et cetera, from actually offering GSRP. So I won't say much more. I'll pass it over to Matt, but wanted to kind of center us in this conversation.
Thanks, Maddie. And thanks, Terry. And thanks for so many of you for joining us today. Obviously, this is a topic of interest to a lot of folks. So I'll try to kind of lay out in a little bit more detail kind of what Maddie had started and talk about maybe some of the broader dynamics around this budget process as well. So then when we get into the conversation in more detail around the specifics that Maddie just outlined, people will have some more context even from an advocacy standpoint. So, as it's been stated, we're in kind of what I would call the beginning of the final stages here of the budget process. Conference committees, there's not much legislative activity for this week because the Mackinac Policy Conference is going on. We're not a lot of policy is being discussed, but that's a different topic. But the next week when the legislature is back, we'll start to see some more activity around this and some negotiations start in earnest. And obviously, there's a lot of concern around the implementation of the GSRP program and the expansion of the GSRP program. So I'm going to back up a little bit and give a little bit of context and history to this. Just I think that'll be helpful for people as this conversation moves forward. And then talk about some specifics around the budget process this year. So, Michigan's had a publicly funded preschool program for a number of years, for a long time, and really nationally renowned as one of the better publicly funded preschool programs for a long time. And we've gone through several different periods of expansion of that program. The most recent, up into, I'm not talking about this year and last year, but before this, was actually under Governor Snyder, our previous governor, with a fully Republican-controlled legislature, where we expanded by over a 2-year period by about $140 million, the total state investment. So up until that time, we had gotten to about $100 to $110 million. And one thing, I'm going to try not to get too far in the weeds here, but I'll do this quickly, is before that last expansion, we separated our GSRP program between two pots. We had the school aid fund pot, which was the school-based GSRP program that went essentially to school districts, what we call LEAs, this is public school districts, to offer pre-K programs in their buildings. And then we had a separate, what we called competitive GSRP program that was funded with general fund dollars that was not nearly as much as the school aid fund side, but that was the competitive part that community-based providers could apply for to offer GSRP or pre-K programs in their communities. They could apply on a grant program basis with that competitive slot. What happened in the last expansion was we realized early, those of us who were advocating for this was a number of years ago, like I said, under Governor Snyder, that in order to be able to push through this Republican legislature an expansion of this program, a significant expansion of this program, we had to shift the administration to the ISDs, to the intermediate school districts. The Republicans at the time, and even Governor Snyder, were not big fans of our public school system and our public schools and our K-12, our LEAs. And so we realized that in order to get the kind of expansion we wanted, we had to shift the administration to the intermediate school districts. The intermediate school districts at first really didn't want that. There was a lot of conversations and work that had to go in to get them to even agree to take over administration of this. Well, we were able to shift administration of the program to the ISDs, and then we're able to do this significant expansion of the program. What came in with that expansion was this requirement that 30% of the slots that each ISD receives, they have to contract with community-based organizations to provide those opportunities, those preschool opportunities in their communities. And then we basically eliminated the two pots. We combined the two pots at that point. It became all school aid fund dollars, but there was this requirement that the ISDs had to contract with mostly the same CBOs who are already offering pre-K programs or wanted to expand their pre-K programs in their communities. And by and large, this has worked fairly well. Certainly, we have some communities, like Terry mentioned, I did the podcast with John from Searles, the superintendent from Midland ISD, Yesterday, they're at 73% of their current slots are going to community-based providers. I know Kent County has a big number as well. There's a lot of counties that are much lower than that, even lower than the 30%. And so there's a process in place where if a county can, or an ISD can show that they've tried to contract with community-based providers, but there aren't enough out there to meet that 30% requirement, they can apply for a waiver from the state, and then maybe they'll end up with 18% or 20% of their slots going to community-based programs, and the rest go to public schools or to LEAs, to K-12 buildings. But this process is by and large worked, and it's a core piece of what we call the mixed delivery model, where we're able to offer GSRP or pre-K programs in both public school buildings and settings and community-based childcare providers. The main concern, or the biggest concern right now amongst a lot of us that are advocating on behalf of childcare interests and are concerned about the implementation of this universal pre-K, is this House version of the budget that passed a couple weeks ago that eliminates that 30% requirement and essentially would allow ISDs, if they chose, to contract all of their pre-K slots with their local school districts. And there's real concern that over time, even if it doesn't happen immediately, over time, that is exactly what would happen, is these pre-K slots would inevitably, ultimately all end up in public school buildings, elementary school buildings, and K-12 school settings. And then we would essentially be taking the 4-year-olds out of our childcare system, eliminating the ability for community-based childcare providers to offer publicly funded pre-K programs, state-funded pre-K programs in their communities, and create a whole lot of challenges and more problems to the childcare system in general. So that's kind of the outline as well. And as Maddie indicated as well, there was another provision that's been made better, but that was initially in the Senate version of the budget around pay parity, and that would require anybody offering GSRP to meet some fairly strict or fairly aggressive pay parity language that was originally included. Now that was watered down significantly or brought back to some form of reality significantly on the Senate floor, but it's still an effort towards pay parity, which in essence is a good thing, but without additional public resources to community-based providers and childcare providers to help meet that pay parity makes it in effect, it makes it a unaffordable option for them to be able to provide GSRP if the language is too strict on the pay parity, because the schools have such built-in advantages around economies of scale and other things in offering these pre-K programs in the buildings and everything else associated with it. So those are the main concerns. The 30% requirement is the one that's getting a lot of attention right now for obvious reasons. One other dynamic I want to talk about a little bit about how this particular budget process is playing out with the politics of the day here in Michigan is that obviously we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic controlled legislature with very narrow Democratic majorities. We're at 56-54 in the House. We're at 20-18 in the Senate. So as narrow as you can be, the Democrats do have control. It's become clear through this process to this point that the Republicans are very unlikely to vote for the final budget, no matter what's in it. And this isn't uncommon. The Democrats did this when they were in the minority as well. They've certainly made the decision that they're going to use the budget as a political tool and as political leverage going into this election. And like I said, this is common for minority parties across the country, not just here in Michigan. You see it at the federal level. We see it in states all over. The Democrats did it as well when they were in the minority here. But they offer amendments that they think are publicly popular, that are difficult for Democrats to vote against. And they'll rail against provisions in the budget that they think are not popular and use it as political messaging tools, and are very, very likely to not vote for these budgets in their final product. The ones that we've seen pass thus far have received very few Republican votes, if any. I think in the Senate, the transportation budget got 1 or 2 Senate Republicans to vote for it. Every other budget was party line vote. And I think similarly in the House, we're likely to see that continue. So what that means is that then, if that's the case, every single Democrat has to vote for these budgets to pass because of the narrow majorities that they have. So for example, the budget version that we're concerned about that passed in the House just 2 weeks ago, passed with all 56 Democrats in the House voting in favor of it. All 54 Republicans voting no. That's an interesting political dynamic that I think as advocates we need to be aware of, and I think we can certainly use to our advantage, that these budgets are likely to pass with on party line votes, and that in our current political situation, that means every single Democrat will have to vote for these budgets. On a timing standpoint, Maddie's right. I think the hope from the legislature is to try to wrap this up by June 13th. I think those of us who have been around here a long time view that with a bit of skepticism. Just because, I mean, this is a big deal. There's a lot that goes into this, not just this issue we're talking about. There's a lot of other sticky issues out there that they're arguing about or negotiating on. And it'll be challenging for them to come to agreement on all of these issues. We are likely to see them come to agreement. I mean, it's ultimately still the Democrats that are in control. We'll see the House and the Senate agree on a final budget that the governor will sign. The June 13th date is interesting because the rumor in town here is that they have some attendance issues once we get past June 13th, where they have members of the legislature, both the House and the Senate, that have trips or other commitments already scheduled that'll make it difficult for them to be here. Well, if you have a bigger majority, that's not as big of an issue. If you can lose 1 or 2 votes, if somebody's going to be out of town or out of the country, well, when you need every single vote, every single Democratic vote to pass these, attendance becomes a big deal. And so that may be a hiccup that we see develop here as this moves forward, when they try to figure out how they can pass these when they have every one of their members present, which becomes a real challenge for leadership, but it's a different discussion as well. So that's kind of some of the context on where we're at. Now I want to introduce our guests today that we have on our panel and let them talk a little bit about themselves and kind of their interest specifically around this issue. And then we'll get into some questions. And please, as Terry said, put any questions you have into the chat, because I'm sure we can get to those as well. So Erica, why don't we start with you? Stephen, I think we can go to next slide probably.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. And thanks for the opportunity to be on this panel. My name is Erica Willard. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Association for the Education of Young Children. We are a membership, professional development, and advocacy organization that supports the early childhood workforce from birth through grade 3. We are averaging a little over 4,000 members right now, and we work in collaboration with many other organizations that are also on this call as well, to do a lot of that work around advocacy and supporting the early childhood workforce specifically, and programs for children and families. So thank you.
And Fran, how about you? Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah, no, thanks, Matt. And thank you for inviting me to join. My name's Fran Talsma, and I'm the CEO for the State Alliance of Michigan YMCAs. And the Ys are the largest provider of youth services in Michigan. There 83% of Michigan residents live within 5 miles of a YMCA program site. That doesn't mean an early childhood or a child care site, but we have, residential camps and all those sorts of things. We currently have 181 out of school time sites throughout Michigan and 88 early child care sites. I'm grateful to be here. I am and happy to engage in this conversation.
Great. And Sasha?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be here. My name is Sasha Klein. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy with the Early Childhood Investment Corporation, or what is better known as ECIC in some places. We are a nonpartisan, quasi-governmental organization created back in 2005. We're a of state government, although we're separate from the state administration. And our mission is to ensure that all young children, particularly children 0 to 5 in Michigan, and their families thrive. And a lot of the work that we do is in the early care and learning space. So this issue is something that we are definitely monitoring and involved in, and excited to be part of a discussion about.
Thank you. Well, thanks again, all of you, for joining us. Let's jump right into it. Stephen, you can go to the next slide, but Sasha, we'll start with you, but I'll ask all of you the kind of the same thing. So, I mean, this is clearly, I think, from the advocacy community in general, and all of us that are here, the colleagues and others, this push for as soon as Governor Whitmer announced this big push for universal pre-K in Michigan, I think there was some excitement from from a big broad level early childhood standpoint. Anytime the focus of a governmental leader like a governor or anybody else on early childhood investments is a positive thing. That said, I think immediately there was some apprehension that if this is not implemented in the right way, there can be some real negative or, unintended consequences that could impact the rest of the childcare or the early learning system beyond pre-K. So Sasha, I'm going to start with you. Talk about that a little bit, about kind of, from your kind of bigger picture statewide perspective, what the concerns are really amongst the folks within the childcare world and how those are kind of coming to the forefront with this proposal that we see in front of us in this debate that we're having.
Sure. Well, so I'll start by saying that ECIC has been a supporter of the Pre-K All initiative, the governor's initiative to create universal preschool in Michigan. And we were particularly pleased to be part of a very thoughtful and collaborative process that the administration implemented around this, what they call the Pre-K for All roadmap, which really was a process of convening stakeholders across the state to think through in advance what are some of the potential pitfalls or unintended consequences of implementing Pre-K for All, and how do we avoid them. And some things that were highlighted in particular through that process, and that the Pre-K for All roadmap recognizes as issues we have to really address, is the importance of a mixed delivery system in implementing Pre-K for All, and particular attention and care around how the implementation of Pre-K for All could affect infant toddler childcare in our state. So we know we're far from the first state to move in this direction, and we've had opportunities to learn from other states that have implemented universal pre-K. One of the first ones to do so was Oklahoma. They did it by primarily having it roll through their school-based programming, and they lost 43% of their licensed childcare spaces at businesses as a result. And that has to do with the way that early care and education is funded, the fact that preschool is one of the sort of better funded ways or better funded approaches to early care and learning. And a lot of businesses use sort of the funds that they garner through there to supplement the more expensive types of care that they provide. And so when all of the 4-year-olds move over to school-based programs, childcare providers really suffer financially, and many of them end up closing shop as a result. And we've seen this happen in multiple places, including New York City. It's such a known phenomena that the federal government has issued a Dear Colleague letter, basically exhorting states to preserve their mixed delivery systems as they implement universal preschool. And so that certainly was sort of a key issue that we've been monitoring and focused on.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I think, and I appreciate, certainly that ECIC was supportive of and really instrumental in the planning around the Pre-K for All implementation plan that now is really what we're arguing is not being followed, really, in essence, is what's happening. And I think, Michigan's Children, I think, was along the same lines, but maybe took a slightly different approach in saying that because of exactly what you laid out, what we're seeing in other states right now is a more holistic approach, where it's a broader approach towards public support and public investment in early care and education as a whole, with pre-K being a part of that, but not a singular focus on pre-K, on 4-year-old pre-K, essentially, which is what we're seeing in Michigan. And that's really, I think, at the heart of where the concern is that we're not also talking about, a lot of this would be an easier conversation, or the potential impacts could be offset to some extent if we were also talking about sizable public investments into childcare funding and other things beyond pre-K, but we're not. We're only focused on, school aid, a significant bump in school aid funding for 4-year-old pre-K, which puts us in this predicament where if we're not including community-based and non-school related childcare providers in that, we've got huge problems. And so I think, you know, that may be a broad, I mean, for timing purposes right now, decisions are going to be made here in the next 2 or 3 weeks specific to the FY25 budget that we need to be focused on. But I just want to make that point, and probably make it again here at some point in the next half hour, that I think as an advocacy community, we've got to do all that we can to broaden this conversation, because otherwise we're going to be right back here next year. Even if we win this fight this year, you know, if we're still talking next year about school aid fund dollars going to 4-year-old pre-K, we're going to be right back in this fight with the public ed lobby that's going to want that money going to school districts. And so we got to start to figure out how to get to a broader conversation, but I appreciate that. So Fran, how about from your perspective as you know, the WISE as an organization who obviously are community-based providers and are right at the center of kind of this current debate around whether or not community-based providers should be included in the pre-K expansion plan. What are you hearing from your members, and what's kind of the feeling out there?
Yeah, so like ECIC, the Y is, you know, came out strongly in support of universal pre-K. But, you know, recognizing that, you know, a mixed delivery system is critical, not only for the success of this program, but for the survival of the other things we do for kids at the Y. So, you know, from, you know, cradle to graduation. Although I don't work in the childcare space specifically, I have a broad area of focus. There is tremendous concern around threatening kind of the fragile infrastructure of childcare. So removing those, if we have to remove those 4-year-olds from the, you know, our early childhood education programs, the rest of our sites are threatened to have to close because of the fragility of the whole infrastructure. So this could be devastating to the Y for sure, or to organizations like ours across the state. And we play a critical role in this. You know, the schools, we recognized even through COVID that schools couldn't do it all. And those community-based organizations really came in to be strong partners with schools. And so for it to be so soon after that, you know, we're looking to kick community-based organizations to the curb is disappointing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, and it's frustrating as well, because on the flip side, and we won't delve into this too much, but Fran, obviously we work together a lot on the out of school time or the after school side, and we're seeing real positive stuff on that front, right? Where this same legislature, same governor are supportive of increased dollars going specifically to community-based programs that are supporting after school and out of school time efforts. But now on, you know, this side of it, on the early care side, they want to steal all that money back for the schools.
Right. I feel like there's some misalignment with the overall the overall theme of the other expansions and other programs for kids.
Absolutely. All right. And Erica, how about from your perspective? Obviously, you guys are right front and center at this. Your membership is at the heart of the entirety of the early care and learning system here in Michigan. So what is kind of the you know, the feeling amongst your members, and obviously the concerns and other things as this process plays out?
I think a lot of, you know, what has already been shared, right? Like that there's concern over the community-based programs. And I think the piece that families are really going to be considering when they are making decisions is those additional wraparound supports that community-based programs are able to provide for families, you know, that before school care, that after school care, some of those odd evening and weekend hours that a lot of the community-based programs offer that school districts just aren't or can't offer to be able to support those families' needs. I think also, you know, in terms of space and capacity, you know, there's just not the space and capacity in all the school districts across the state to be able to allow for the expansion that is being proposed without that collaborative support from the community-based organizations. And I think, you know, like Sasha was talking about relating to and looking at lessons learned in other states, I think, you know, we definitely have to look at some positive and some lessons learned from other states in terms of, you know, how they're doing the investment to support and transform the entire early care and education field, stabilizing, healing, and then transforming it. I think, you know, I was reading an article the other day about Massachusetts, and there's a lot of really good things going to be wholly, you know, the whole system, and looking at how we can support and bolster the whole system and bring it all up to be able to support family and children's needs in our state.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, let's talk a little bit now, maybe get into a little bit more detail, and then we can open it up to the audience as well about the kind of the pay parity issue. So, I mean, this is a hard one, I think, for advocates, right? I mean, we've been advocating for years and we'll continue to advocate for years that if we really want to truly fix and support the early care and education system, we got to pay people more. And so, at its base, that's what an effort at pay parity is trying to do. But let's talk about maybe more of the specifics. Sasha, and I'll start with you again around how this just doesn't work without additional resources towards community-based providers and how they're at a disadvantage when trying to compete with school-based programs from a pay perspective.
Absolutely. ECIC does quite a bit of work around the sort of wages and early childhood workforce compensation kind of piece of the equation. We certainly support better living wages for our early educators and our brain builders, without a doubt. The issue is that, the feds report nationally, and this is true in Michigan as well, at the national level, the average childcare business is operating at a 1% profit margin. 1%. Right? And so it's really, as you guys have described, it's I think of a Jenga game, like with those blocks all built on each other, and you kind of poke out one little block and the whole thing comes tumbling down. And so by insisting that community-based GSRP providers pay their teachers and sort of the average GSRP teacher wage, without actually providing any additional funds that enable them to do that, they can't operate a business that stays and much less makes any sort of profit. So this unfunded mandate is the real problem there. What we really need is an influx of funding, a greater public investment in the entire early care and education system that is equitable, and would allow these businesses to actually do what they want to do, which is pay their staff a livable wage, and amazingly, maybe even offer benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Fran, how about from your perspective? I mean, I'm sure the Ys are doing everything they can to pay their employees as much as they possibly can. And I would beg to guess even probably subsidizing, pay for childcare workers and other things with other pots that they may have, and probably losing money on some of these programs because of that. But still, it has to be difficult to think that you'd have to compete with a K-12 school system that has all of those built-in advantages.
That's right, Matt. And so, like Sasha said, the operating margins are so small, and so our childcare programs are subsidized by other kind of revenue generators within the Y. But we want strong families and strong communities. So, we believe in, paying our folks as much as possible. In an organization like the Y that not only provides childcare, but also has lifeguards and front desk workers and, exercise instructors for adult fitness, we would have wage compression too with these kind of mandates to raise wages for one of our staff team. We don't, at the Y, we don't separate folks out like, oh, you're in this, quadrant, or you're in this quadrant. So everyone at that kind of seniority level would be impacted by this, and which would, be a huge challenge for our Ys to remain operational with these unfunded mandates.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, I mean, as another kind of example of the challenges for the businesses is as a whole, and this is kind of where and I know Erica and Sasha, Fran, you've heard me with this. I think this is where part of the messaging, at least immediately right now, around this advocacy effort needs to go. And Erica, I want you to talk about this. The reality is if these decisions are made in the way that we don't want them to be, we're going to be putting small businesses out of business. And these are small businesses that Democrats talk about supporting, right? And campaign on the fact that they support, and their politics should be centered around. And so this idea that they're going to make budget decisions here, that are being driven in some part, at least, by the public ed lobby, that is going to have the impact of putting small female-owned, minority-owned businesses out of business in their communities is really atrocious. And I think it's something that we have to continue to point out. And I think this goes to this notion of every single Democrat is going to have to vote for this budget at the end of the day. And there ought to be some of them that should have a real hard time in voting for a budget that's going to have a negative impact to that regard around small businesses, small business owners, many of them owned by women, like I said, in their communities. So Erica, talk to that point a little bit about how your members are viewing this and the concern that they have.
Yeah, I think as you talked about, like that oftentimes providers will say, I'm just a provider. No, you are a small business owner. You are providing care and education and support for the families in your community. You contribute to your community. Like there's so much more than, just anything. There's such a critical component of our ecosystem and our whole workforce, not just the early childhood workforce, but it then goes on to impact the workforce in the rest of our communities and the businesses that are able to open and expand and retain their staff because there's quality childcare programs within these communities. So it's such a bigger impact than only a childcare impact if this isn't rolled out and if this isn't done correctly. And I think there's programs that have been tested that have shown that the supporting the workforce and increasing the wages is a good thing. We're very much in support of that. We're very much in support of investment in those wages, but without the investment to be able to provide those increases, that it's just going to be impossible for businesses to sustain. And if we roll it out for only this population and not, again, support the whole system and bolster the whole system and the whole workforce, including the 0 to 3 workforce, we're going to lose those folks that are in the 0 to 3 workforce because they're not necessarily going to stay there. They're going to go into a program or work for another area of the program. If this is the only piece that is being funded to be able to increase wages, they're going to transition out of some of those 0 to 3 programs and into the pre-K. So we're going to have a workforce crisis even more exacerbated than it has been after COVID. So we have to continue to support and invest in the whole system to be able to build this and to make this work.
Can I just underscore a point that you started to sort of hint at, which is the equity issues around this are really significant. And I, in general, don't feel like they've kind of been at the center of the conversation in the way that I'd like to see them be. Indeed, like the huge percentage of childcare businesses, nonprofits, for-profits, et cetera, are operated by women, especially women of color. And so when you look at what happened in Oklahoma, where they lost 43% of their businesses by kind of going down this path that we're now having to consider. And you think about what that does to a group of women. CBOs, community-based providers, have been providing GSRP in Michigan since 1987, right? These are not folks who are new to this. This is not something schools did and then community-based providers came along and said, let's do it too. These women have been sort of providing the backbone of this service for families in our state, almost half of which are also families of color who are benefiting from these programs. Head Start programs are included amongst them. This is going to have a massive effect on their ability to remain viable and continue to provide Head Start. I just think, as folks vote on party lines around these budgets, I think a lot of folks really Democrats in particular, don't recognize or understand what this impact would be on sectors of the community that traditionally they've really identified with and kind of held out to support. And I think that will be really devastating, and it will be particularly devastating to providers and families of color in low-income communities.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I do see one question here in the chat, and then I'd encourage everybody else on to think of any questions you may have and pop them in the chat as well. What would be the wage that the parity would require? So this is the language. It was changed on the Senate floor so this is in the Senate bill. There's no wage parity language in the House bill, but in the Senate bill, the language was changed to require that anybody offering a GSRP program would have to meet the median wage of GSRP providers, GSRP employees in their prosperity region. And this is a region that the state uses for other purposes, economic development things and other regions. I think there's 7 or 9. I think there's nine prosperity regions that the state is divided into that came out of economic development years ago in a different map structure. I don't have the breakdown. I don't know if anybody's even done the breakdown yet on what that would mean in every actual prosperity region. But I do know that the impact of this is much less than it was originally. The original language had it in the actual ISD area and as a much more focused on focusing or forcing community-based providers to meet the wages of school-based entities. And so it has been softened significantly, I guess, is a thing, but I don't know what the exact numbers are. A couple other points to make, and then I'm going to let Maddie talk about some of the advocacy materials that are out there. And like I said, please put any questions. We got a few minutes left here in the chat. But one thing I think is important for everyone to understand, and I know everybody on the panel here agrees with me, we're not advocating that there shouldn't be school-based GSRP programs. Nobody's advocating for that. I mean, in a lot of places that makes sense. For a lot of families that makes sense. If you have a first grader and a 4-year-old, it probably makes sense if it's available to have your 4-year-old sometimes in that same school as your first grader and other things. But what we are advocating for is that it cannot be only a school-based program, which is exactly what Sasha laid out, what we saw in other states and where we saw real big problems. And this specific exclusion of this provision in the House budget could lead us to that path and would inevitably even start to lead us to that path next year already if the ISDs are not required to work with their community-based providers. Now, the other thing I'll point out is that this isn't, and I've been a little bit surprised by this. Like Terry said, I had John Searles from Midland, the ISD, on my podcast yesterday, but there are some folks in the public ed lobby that are even pushing back against this. Make no mistake, this originated from the public ed lobby. When I say the public ed lobby, the traditional public schools, political forces that argue that, and I understand this. I chaired the school aid budget my last term in the legislature, and I would have been arguing the same thing, that school aid fund dollars should go to school-based entities. I think there's a different situation here. But anyway, so that's the traditional lobby that'll argue that all school aid fund dollars should go to school-based groups and not to community-based organizations, even if they're providing pre-K. But there are some outstanding voices in that community that are pushing back on this. The Midland superintendent being one of them. I know there's some in Kent as well. And so it's not universal amongst the public ed folks that this is a direction we should be going either. And I think that's important to note. Just like we're not arguing that school-based programs don't have any place in GSRP or even in GSRP expansion. All right, Maddie, why don't you point out, I know you put them in the chat, but some of the resources that folks have to advocate on this issue. And then, like I said, if anybody else has any questions or if I missed any in the chat, we can get to those next.
Definitely. So so in the chat, I put a link. You can take like 1 or 2 minutes to tell your lawmakers to support childcare providers and the families that they serve through this GSRP expansion. So you'll see it's in the chat. It's the Linktree / Childcare Michigan, and that will lead you to like an action alert where you can quickly put your name, your address, your email, and then it will have a pre-populated email template. Now you can just take that and read it through. You can send it as is. We'd recommend that you share some of your personal perspective, like as a parent, as a childcare provider, as a concerned community member, as a grandma, share why this is important to you. But we also, like in that link tree, it's a series of links. So one of the links in there is to a Think Babies talking points that they put together, some really comprehensive, really great, info to help you think about, like, if you'd like to send or have a call with your lawmaker or schedule a meeting, you can use those talking points to do so. I'd strongly encourage you to use that link to email your lawmaker. Also, we talk about often that phone calls often make a bigger impact. So you can also use that link and call your lawmaker using those talking points or that email template. And as we've been talking about, since the state budget is going to be decided literally in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. So really now is the time to do so in the next few days, in the next week. So, definitely reach out if you have any questions. We'd love to see, lawmakers' inboxes flooded with outreach.
And really, for a lot of your lawmakers now that aren't on the appropriations committee or aren't on the appropriations subcommittee that handles these issues, this is the first time they're really engaging on a lot of these issues. They're not involved really up until this point to a big extent. And like I said, these are likely to pass by one or two votes in both chambers. And so every lawmaker has an outsized influence on this process from this point forward. Up until this point, they really don't. But now from this point forward, especially the Democrats in the legislature are really, in a position to have to have some real influence on the final product that comes out. A couple other things I've seen in the chat. I think Andrea put in what the median wage rates across the prosperity regions range from. That makes sense to me. That's probably, I don't know, I have those numbers right in front of me, but that certainly probably makes sense. And then Marcus from the Grand Rapids Chamber about the sign-on letter that was put together for anyone who wants to sign on. We will share that out with folks as well. I know Michigan's Children plans to sign on to that as well. So we are seeing the business community as well engage on this issue, and they've been very supportive around childcare issues in the past. And so that's
Matt, are you referencing our sign-on letter?
What's
Is
that?
that what you, oh, different letter. Okay.
That was a different one, but no, Sasha, why don't you talk about yours as well?
Yeah. So ECIC and our partners did put together a sign-on letter. It's now closed. It just closed, but I think it's really powerful to let your legislators know that we had over 1,200 people sign on. That includes more than 260 organizations. These were early care and education businesses. These were ISDs, Head Start grantees, economic development commissions, large employers. I see the Grand Rapids Chamber on this call today. Part of the context is, we have a state where we're losing population and we're trying desperately to attract and retain business. So we have jobs in the community, and the Grand Rapids Chamber and Michigan Chamber came out with a report last year showing that we're losing almost $2.9 billion a year in Michigan because of inadequate childcare resources. And so something like this that could threaten that and reduce childcare supply even further is going to have a really significant effect on the economy. So folks are really speaking up and expressing their concern about this exclusion of CBOs. And I know in conversations we've had with legislators, just even letting them know kind of how many people and organizations have signed on around this issue, I think has been meaningful to them. So I encourage you to share that out. And we will be sending that letter out to lawmakers at the end of this week.
Yeah, I would echo what Sasha said. Lawmakers are hearing about it. I know that from conversations I've had directly with them as well. They're feeling the heat on this issue, which is good, which is exactly what they should be, and that's exactly what we should be doing. But we need to keep the pressure on here for the next couple of weeks so that we ultimately get to an outcome that is acceptable. And then we need to start to change the conversation to a broader one. And I see some comments and questions in the chats. Obviously, there's a lot of other things going on with this budget as well. Terry referenced in the beginning, we've got a couple of budget basics out there outlining kind of some of the key areas, not related to just this issue, but with other issues as well. I know there's a big opportunity around early on with some potential increased funding there. After school, out of school time, I mentioned with Fran is a big issue where, we're involved in, and there's some opportunity there. So there's some good things and some other good opportunities in this budget as well. So feel free to look at our information, michiganschildren.org, or reach out to us. We can get you more information on any of those other issues. We just thought this one was of particular importance, I know, to a lot of folks on the call, and something that is generating a lot of concern in advocacy efforts, and something that we need to continue to really make the push on here at the final stages. All right. Well, I want to once again thank everybody for tuning in. Join us again next month. And as Maddie said, please reach out to your legislators as often, and encourage as many of your colleagues and your networks to do so as well. This is going to be an interesting and exciting next couple of weeks here, and hopefully we get to a positive outcome, and we'll have some good news to report on this and some other things when this budget process is finalized sometime here in June. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, that was great. Thanks.